communities. So, resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today we are talking about Bill C-27 after it's studied by the Standing Committee on Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development. This bill seeks, according to the government, to enhance the financial accountability of First Nations. And I think that I will set aside the irony of the situation of seeing the government talk about financial transparency. I think that everybody understands what this involves and needs no comment. So this bill seeks to enhance the financial accountability and transparency of First Nations by making it mandatory to disclose their financial statements publicly, including wages paid by First Nations and all entities controlled by that First Nation leader and the advisors in the exercise of their duties. Furthermore, the obligation of setting out the salaries of the band council members and other documents have to be published on the website for a certain period. There are many things in this bill that we think are problematic on this side of the House, and I think that the colleagues who spoke before me gave a very good summary of those points. So that is why I'm going to talk instead about not the substance of the bill, but rather the administrative burden that the bill represents for many First Nations communities. First of all, the band councils already provide their annual financial statements, which have been audited based on agreements with the federal government. What will the current bill do in addition to this is to make all of this a bit more complicated. According to figures by the Auditor General in the 2006 report, on average, a First Nation must produce approximately 200 reports a year. 200 reports a year when some communities have populations of approximately 1,000 people or even fewer residents, 500, 700 people. And when we think about this, you might react. So if there's not enough transparency, when they have to write about 2 reports a week in the First Nations communities, I would suggest to the federal government perhaps they have to rethink the system as a whole. It would be more useful and more effective than to add another report on top of all of that. I looked at the speech given by the member for Saskatoon Rosetown Bigger, who had presented the previous version of this bill in the last Parliament. And this member said communities are making major efforts to ensure that the reports are disclosed to members of their community. So, included on the website and in pamphlets distributed to all households, and it's also set out in the offices. So member is saying that band council members and the chiefs are aware of the importance of ensuring transparency with regard to members of their own communities, and that they are already doing very well without the need for them to be reminded of doing it with a bill that would force them to do it. A member of First Nations who appeared before the committee also confirmed this fact to us, and this individual said that transparency and disclosure of information is extremely important to our members. For decades, we have been publishing in their entirety the reports, and we recently started to put it on our website, including the salaries paid to band council members. Just a little side note here. What are we doing with the communities, like in my riding, who don't have access to internet? So we're requiring them to put on their website for a 10-year period when they don't even have access to internet in those communities. So this is an entirely different issue that I would ask. At the same time, of course, I don't have the answer, but there you go.
My Conservative colleague who introduced the bill last Parliament. That chief and First Nation elected official recognized the value in ensuring the action and decision of elected officials are clearly visible to all and to the community. They recognize that their citizens share a fundamental right to know how their money is being spent. In fact, several First Nations go to great lengths to make this information available to community members. So why is there a need for this humiliating and useless bill? This bill finds its root and origin in the racist assumption that all First Nations are either corrupt or incompetent, and I reject both of those assumptions. We need to stop those assumptions for good. Les conseils de bande.
Band councils are already being accountable to government, and they're communicating that information to their members. So I have a question. Why are we discussing this bill at all? Because somebody in the government decided that having a 201th report would be fun to impose. In the 2006 Auditor General's report, it stated that 96% of the First Nations handed in their 200 annual reports on time and with no problem. And they led to no comments or criticism. All was going well. Only 1.7% were placed under third-party management for problems with their financial management.
Is there a problem of chronic lack of transparency on the part of First Nations? No, on the contrary.
Statistic that there is nothing wrong with First Nation financial transparency. 96% of all First Nations in this country submit their audit on time without comments or criticism from the auditor. The lack of transparency is so minimal that I just wonder why we are discussing this bill. La vérité, c'est que tous ces rapports.
The truth is that all of these reports, which for the most part aren't even used by federal organizations, are causing First Nations band councils to waste time. They could be using that time to look after the needs of their people. However, today we're debating the 221st annual report. Abitibi-Témiscamingue has 5 Aboriginal communities in the Algonquin Nation. Some of them are considered models of sound management and examples in terms of development. I can give you, as an example, the Abitibi First Nation on the Pequot Reserve near Amos. Chief Kitsabish and the council worked very hard to ensure the prosperity and sustainability of their community. They are working together with regional development players and stakeholders. They recently signed a historic agreement with their neighbors and a mining company. But the government is trying to use and to foster a lack of trust and incomprehension among these groups.
Anishinaabe Nation Chief Madeleine Paul and her band council work so hard to ensure a healthy and wealthy community to future generations. She has to deal with the opportunities brought by rare earth mining development and the danger having Lake Kipawa polluted if things are not being done properly. The Témiscamingue First Nation and the new chief, Terence McBride, are also striving to seek new partnerships for their development. Je pense sincèrement qu'il y a d'autres priorités.
I sincerely believe that there are other priorities. As we've seen, First Nation transparency, financial transparency is not challenged in the vast majority of cases. Most of them have a conscience and understand the need for financial transparency. They are providing it at ready. I'd also like to, as my colleagues have done before me, underscore a very important point, the lack of consultation with First Nations. I'd like to quote Article 4 of the UN Declaration on Aboriginal Peoples. It states that Aboriginal peoples, in the exercising of their right to self-determination, have the right to be independent and to manage their own affairs as regards their internal and local affairs, and to use the means, financial means, at their disposal for their activities. I'd like to encourage all members to visit Aboriginal communities to see just how important to financial transparency is, to look at what is being done in terms of management in those communities, and to see just how interested people are in knowing what's going on. Many of those people who go to the band council meetings to see precisely what is happening and what is being done with their money. If we compare that to participation on city councils and our towns and communities, the non-Aboriginal ones, I think we should be proud of the participation. in Aboriginal communities. People go to the meetings. They want to know what's being done with their money. The band council leaders are diligent. They are providing this information, and it's completely useless to impose upon them a 201st report when they're doing everything that they need to be doing at present. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to put a question to my colleague. As you know, the Conservatives talk a lot about red tape. They say we need to eliminate red tape. It's not good. We need to eliminate as much red tape as we can. But when it comes time to act, they do exactly the opposite. Now, we've heard we're looking at the situation with the unions and union disclosure. That will add bureaucracy and red tape. They're speaking out of both sides of their mouths. They're calling on these communities to deal with more red tape instead of the opposite. What does my colleague think about that? The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. I'd like to thank the member for Sherbrooke for his question. These communities do indeed have a number of documents to produce. If I look at other businesses in my riding and we compare it to an Aboriginal community, it's incredible to see what is being asked of them in terms of reports they need to produce. Many times they're living in poverty and difficult conditions. However, the red tape is ever present, ensuring the transparency of these communities can be achieved without adding another burden. If government members, federal government members, went to these communities to see on the ground what is happening, they would realize the situation. When you go to a community, when you take time to get interested in it, to look at what's been done, you can realize, in fact, and see whether a community is managing its money correctly or not. But if you don't take the time to go and meet them and talk to them, this is what happens.
Thanks, the Honourable Member for Palliser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thanks to the Honourable Member for her speech. She mentioned how First Nations would, without a website, be able to publish requirements that's asked for in this Act. Mr. Speaker, the legislation calls for public disclosure, consolidated financial statements, and schedule of remuneration. Most of the data that's asked for, with very little additional data, is already supplied by people. It's not an onerous task. They're not required to pick up houses and move them or anything. It's entry off a keyboard, Mr. Speaker. Pretty straightforward. It's important to note that posting documents on a website is insufficient to discharge a First Nations duty, but the First Nation may charge a fee for providing copies if another First Nation enters the other person's First Nation information. The fees may not exceed the cost of transmission. So these, what was mentioned by our honourable member was a lot of little things that amount to very little and would in no way affect information transformation to members of the band. So that's what the Act is all about, to increase the information for band members.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said in my remarks, chiefs and band council leaders are already providing this information, financial information, to members of their communities. So the community already has access to that information. That's already been done. Now, if, however, a decision is made to put all of the financial data on the Internet, contracts with the mining companies, for example, in my riding, there are chiefs, band chiefs, that are currently negotiating with the mining giants for mines that want to be built on their ancestral lands. If that information is published on the Internet, what that means is that each time a negotiation is undertaken, they'll try to get a good contract for their members, but they'll say, well, that First Nation, look on Internet, it says this is what they did. They were satisfied with this measure. Well, it's all fine and well, but no, it doesn't work that way. We're talking about negotiating with large corporate mining companies in no other community other than the Aboriginal communities would they be required to disclose negotiations with large corporations. These are people who live in a community of some 800 people. They have an education that sometimes is a high school, sometimes not, sometimes a higher level. They're being called upon. They're trying to negotiate with these communities.
Member for